Come with us as we are transported to 17th century London, where double lives, courtly intrigue, and murder embroil us. Today we chat with Holly West about her novel, Mistress of Lies. Welcome to Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews. I'm Sharon Lynn, and welcome to you, Holly.
Hi, Sharon. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here today. So I do just want to jump right in because the book does take place in 1679. So a
I
couple
know
of
it's such a random year. It's like, why that year of all
why
years?
that year?
That was
And
so
that
specific.
and that is actually one of my questions. Why that year?
Well, it was because I knew I wanted to set a book during the reign of King Charles II. Um, I'm not really big into the monarchy, but when I was a teenager, I read the book Forever Amber, and I became just really fascinated with that time period, with him. You know, he was one of my first literary crushes, even though he was a real person. Um, but you know, when so much when it's that much far back in history, that person actually becomes, I feel like, fictional in a way,
Right. Yeah.
because they're so inaccessible as humans. But of course, he was a real human being. Um, and so when I was starting to figure out, like, I wanted to write a mystery, I wanted to set it during the reign of King Charles II, and he reigned from 1660 to 1685. And some pretty big events happened during his reign. The fire of London and the plague were the two big things, and it changed the landscape of London forever. And actually, I would say now I'm getting deep into the the nerdy parts of all of this. But prior to that, his father had been executed, and there was about 25 years where Oliver Cromwell, who was like a terrible Puritan leader who, like, basically abolished the theater. And so when King Charles II came back, when he was restored to the monarchy by the people or by Parliament, um, he kind of brought back all the fun and all of the glitz and glamour of court life. And so it was like a particularly fun period. So the question is, why did I not set it earlier? Well, first of all, those 1660, I believe the fire was in 1665 and the plague was in 1664, or I might have reversed that. But did I reverse it? Yeah, yeah, okay. That's about, I mean, people know about that. We have Samuel Pepys' diary and things like that. I'm not saying it's widely known, especially in America, but certainly it's a well-documented part of history. So I didn't really want to write about that time period, but I didn't know what I wanted to write about. And I found a story on Wikipedia about the unsolved murder of a magistrate named Sir Edmund Godfrey. And so my first book, Mistress of Fortune, is a fictional retelling of his murder. And it took place in 1679, which meant I was locked into that period for the second book, which was Mistress of Lies. Um, and yeah, that's how, a very long-winded way of saying that's how I chose it.
Wiki. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, actually, after the fire and the entirety of London burned down, they made it illegal to have thatched roofs
Mhm.
in London. So in 1990, when they rebuilt the Globe, they had to get a parliamentary decree in order to have that be a thatched roof.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. Yeah, I don't think I knew that. Or if I did, it's like way long past my memory,
I,
right?
yeah, I did theater nerd, which I think I've mentioned.
No, I love it. I love it.
So what inspired you to create the character of Lady Wilde and then her alter ego, Mistress Ruby?
I think, that's an interesting question for me because I wrote these books 10, 12 years ago, and it took me 5 years to write the first one. And aside from knowing that I wanted to write about a character who was a mistress to King Charles, I didn't know where else to take her. And there was a character, speaking of theater, you've heard of Afra Ben?
Mhm.
So Afra Ben, I read, I think probably on Wikipedia. Somehow I found a reference to Afra Ben, and her Lady Wilde's backstory is very, very loosely based on Afra Ben. But I've also always been really interested in not in the occult as something that could be actual, that could be real, but the way people practice and believe in the occult. And
Mhm.
I liked the idea of having a character who didn't believe in it, but decided she was going to make her living through desperation. She had spent some time in debtor's prison. This is all her backstory that comes out in various parts of the book. Um, so I basically out of desperation, she needed to be able to earn a living, even though she was a mistress to the king. She creates this alter ego where she secretly she's a fortune teller and she lives this secret life as Mistress Ruby.
And I absolutely love that. And a couple of things with that right there is out of desperation, debtor's prison. Like it left, you know, father's money went all to the oldest son. Oldest son also dies. Um, and if you don't pay your debts, you wind up in prison, which happened to a lot of women. So you strike a really fine balance between it really sucked to be female at the time and ooh, this is kind of fun. So I don't know if you can talk us through your process of what did you decide to emphasize and what did you decide to just let people do research if they wanted to do research on it more as far as women in that time period.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question because I don't remember having like for every choice I made was serving the story and the character.
Mhm.
So I wasn't like thinking, for me it wasn't about any sort of feminist take, although she absolutely is a feminist and she's not ashamed of what she does, even though she could possibly be thrown in jail because witchcraft. She's not a witch, and she's very clear about that. But she is taking some risks because the very people who come to Mistress Ruby to have their fortunes told, many of them are the rich that are part of the same court she is. And so she's I definitely am in asking readers to suspend disbelief somewhat,
Mhm.
but I'm fine with that because
That's what
I
I
wanted to
did.
write like a rip-roaring story more so than like which isn't to say authenticity and facts were super super important to me, but always in service to the story, always in service to the characters. And so in terms of like choosing what to keep and what to take out, it kind of was just a natural process of what made sense for the story. And
Right.
I felt like, I think it kind of stands on its own. She's living during this time period. So she's not looking at it from the standpoint of this is how it's always been for her and for women. And so she's
Right.
not looking at it from the standpoint of, wow, this really isn't very fair. I mean, it's going to be, even now, we're still fighting those same battles. And, obviously it's way much better for women now, but, when you're living in it and you're just, that's the way it is, and you can't really conceive of more freedom. I mean, you
Right.
do what you
Right.
can or what you have to survive.
Yeah, this is
And
just
she's
what
not
life
a
is.
pious woman, so she doesn't have God hanging over her. So so her choices aren't dictated so much by what is moral and what is right. It's dictated more by, how do I get food on the table? How do I survive?
What do I need to do to survive? So, and part of that is she does transform herself so that no one recognizes her. And I really loved that scene. I actually teach makeup, monster makeup. So I love any book that has a scene
Oh,
where
I
somebody
love
puts on a
that.
bunch of makeup. But
Yeah.
I wondered about your research process on that because she uses very specific things to make herself look old.
She does, and it's not just her, other
And
characters
Charlotte, yeah.
assist her. Um, Sam is her bodyguard. He is in the first book mostly. And he makes some appearances in the second book, but he transforms himself as well. And so one of the things he does is he puts cotton roll in his mouth to change the shape of his mouth. And her I don't actually read. I think you might, because you've read the books more recently than I do, and it's embarrassing. This is, I think, one of the things about authors that people might not realize is that they put the book, once the book gets published, they don't necessarily revisit it that much.
Right.
It was so long ago.
It's like moving on.
I think, yeah,
But
I
she
did
does something.
research.
She's
Go ahead.
got coal that she, does all of her lines in
Yeah,
the coal. And then she actually just uses grease and fireplace ash and
yeah.
yeah,
And
and it's really, really just I mean, I could visualize it as she was putting on the
yeah, it's
makeup.
like she's a YouTube influencer doing the only with 17.
I'm just gonna talk while I make myself hideous and old.
Exactly. And by the way, um, yeah, well, that would be fun. Makeup, a YouTube channel that focused on makeup. The problem is all that stuff was so toxic. Like
Oh,
makeup has changed for a reason.
yeah,
And they used
some of that
gold,
stuff
they
is
used
not good to have on your face.
yeah, there were like very bad things that they were using for it. So yeah, I wish I could answer that question more better.
Or better,
Better,
or
but
better.
again, it was like one of those facts that like I did the research to get to that point and then kind of just let it fly away.
If you circle too long on the research, you don't get anything done. So it does need to be like,
Yeah.
okay.
Well, and here's the thing, when you're interested in a certain time period, as I was, I have so many books. I would go to, actually, I still go to used bookstores and I look for books on that time period. And I'm always hoping to find like a gem that's gonna like be, because you don't find a lot of that online, although I have found some good contemporary reference books online, like recipes and things like home remedies and things like that, which are really fascinating. Um, but talking about research, that deep dive you take, people always ask, like, was the research hard? No, it was fun.
I love
Writing the
research.
book was hard. The research was fun.
Yeah, if I could just do the research and not have to do anything else, that's
Yeah,
all I would do.
exactly, exactly.
All right, so you do, and I think you kind of already mentioned this, but because I am a theater nerd, I'm just going to bring it up again. You have one little brief scene with her brother Lucian, who is a playwright, and so we get to go to the theater. And I think my original question was, why did you include that scene? Because I loved it. Um, but I think you already mentioned it was, once Charles II came back, it was fun again. So there,
Well, what I should say is that Lucian is her brother. He, in the first book, more than any other character, his voice just came out so easily. And in the second book, he was a more serious character. He wasn't speaking to me, and I feel weird even saying it that way, but in the first book, his voice just came out so easily. And so he is much more a feature of the first book than the second book. Um, but because of the circles, one of the questions you asked, and I'm sorry to like jump ahead, but it kind of fits the topic. One of the questions you ask is about how they get involved with the court.
yeah.
And going back to what I said about he was very loosely based on John Wilmot, the Earl of Rochester, who
Okay.
was dandy during that time And his there's been movies made about him. Johnny Depp stars in a movie about him, and now I can't remember what it's called. But gosh, now you're bringing all this stuff back. Yes, was very loosely based on him, and
Mhm.
he was a king's favorite until he wasn't, because he was just always had his fingers. He's such a gossip and all of these things. Um, and that's very much the character. Lucian is a fop, which
Mhm.
is like a dandy, and that was very much the voice he had in the first book. But he's wiser. Some things happened in the first book, I think, that shaped his personality a little bit in the second book, and he's more of a voice of wisdom for Isabel, saying, "No, I think you should leave this alone. This is dangerous. Didn't you learn anything from the
Yeah.
first book?" But to answer the question of like how easy was it to get in the court, it really, and then you even asked, did you just have to be good looking? Well, I think there were various ways. Obviously, you're born into it. You're born into the what's the word, when the gentry in England, the peers, you're a
Oh,
peer,
here's okay.
you're born with a title, like it's passed down through family. But in Isabel's case, she married him, she got pregnant by the king, and the king wanted to, um, because of his reputation, he had lots of children born out of wedlock. He asked her to marry someone who is not a very good man, and as a reward for this, bestows a title of knight. He gives him a knighthood, which
Hmm.
is why she has a title.
Yeah.
And so I loosely, I played with all of that very much. And I think, again, asking readers to suspend disbelief in the sense of like, let's just take these characters to some extent as fully formed.
Hmm.
They're here, and just accept that. Which
Yeah.
I know, I think about that with historical fiction, because the people who write it and readers are so usually just so entrenched in the facts of the time period. Sometimes I feel a little odd admitting that. But again, I'm a storyteller. I'm not an academic, and I never was. And I've read books based on real life people and real life facts that stick so closely to the facts that you lose the story.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
dry. And that was never my intent. So yes, I did base it very much on what I could find. But if I couldn't find it, I made it up. And I don't apologize for that. Thank
Well, you shouldn't, because it's a rip-roaring good story.
you. Thank you.
Okay, so I found this absolutely fascinating. Her brother, the one that has died, and that we find not the way she thought he had, and he had all kinds of secrets, but he was a goldsmith.
Yes.
And you are a goldsmith.
Yes, I was. I don't
Yeah.
do
So tell me about goldsmithing. That is just cool.
well, I don't even know where to start with that. I started because in the early 2000s I lived in Los Angeles, and I quit my job because my husband's job gave us some flexibility with that. And so I was kind of searching for what I wanted to do with my own life. And as part of that, I took some courses at UCLA Extension. And I'd always been interested in jewelry making. And so I signed up for this class, and it turned out it was basically full on goldsmithing using Italian techniques. You start with a lump of gold, you add alloys to it, you shape it, you do all of these things, and you're like basically making metal jewelry like this. I didn't make this. This is just cheap, but I could make a chain like this.
That is
Um,
so.
but I have made chains like this, and rings and stuff like that. So when I came up with that backstory, I very much it her brother was always, not Lucian, Adam was always a goldsmith. So in the first book, that's part of the backstory. Her father was a blacksmith, and then when they came to London, when her father died, the family came to London, and her brother apprenticed with a very famous goldsmith. who that person is based on a real life person. And that's kind of where that came from. Like specifically, one of the aspects that I didn't know going into it was that during the 17th century in England, the goldsmiths were the bankers. And it's because goldsmiths had large enough safes where people could, the wealthy could deposit their gold with the goldsmith, and he would keep it from them, and he would provide an interest rate for them. So they were earning interest on it. And but that was the people who were making jewelry were also the bankers.
That's really
So it was a
cool.
goldsmith banker. Uh,
Goldsmith banker.
yeah.
That is absolutely amazing. So did you always intend for it to be a just two books, or is there a third book floating around in your brain somewhere that we would be lucky enough to see someday?
I Okay, so I had a two-book deal with Corinna Press, which is the digital imprint of Harlequin, and they did not want a third book. It was one of those things where I don't think the publisher was the right publisher. They were looking to expand their offerings because Corinna Press is very much more romance and paranormal romance and things like that, because it was definitely experimental. And like I said, this was in 2014.
Hmm.
So ebooks weren't what they are now. I think now if the books came out, it would be a different situation.
Hmm.
But it just wasn't the right fit from a sales standpoint. Although, and I have nothing bad to say about Corinna Press or Harlequin or anything like that. It just wasn't a good fit. And so they did not want a third book. And after that, I decided that I wanted to start writing contemporary
Hmm.
mysteries, which is what I have been working on since those books were published. So ask me how that's going. But to answer your question, I have thought, and even, you asking for this interview made me think about like maybe I do need to go back to those books. I think it's always like struggling for like what is your niche? Where are you going to settle?
Hmm.
And by settle, I don't mean settle for, I mean settle into your career
Right, yeah.
or how you're gonna go forward. And so the answer to your question is there is no third book, but I haven't 100% put to rest a third book.
Okay, that's a good answer. And get your contemporary ones published. I will read them.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. Say that.
so in addition to being an author, you are also an editor. Both you did about BoucherCon anthology, and um, for those of us in the Southern California Mystery Writers of America, your name is very familiar because you edit the newsletter. So, how does that interfere, support, work with trying to get a book written?
Well, I think that it's a good thing and a bad thing because it does take a lot of time, but I really, really enjoy reading other people's work and I enjoy the opportunity to help them make it better. So consequently, I do a lot of beta reading for friends. I'm always quick to say, "Oh, if you need a beta reader," because I do think it helps me put my own work in perspective in terms of like early drafts. Like
Hmm.
when you see, especially someone who has seen quite a bit of success, you see one of their early drafts and you think, oh, they're not that different from me. But it also helps me really think about the way books are structured. And because I'm really a nerd about structure, which is both to my benefit and to my not my benefit because I get
Detriment.
obsessed when it's structured. Is that I kind of get lost in the woods with that, which has been part of my problem finishing the book I'm writing now. But I think aside from, editing takes time away from my own writing. And one thing I've learned in the last, I don't know, maybe the last couple years is that I really need to preserve my creative time and use it to its best advantage because it's a short window, and um if I don't like use it properly, it fritters away.
Hmm.
So let's say I have 2 hours a day where I can be like really fully creative, if I waste that time on other things, and I shouldn't say waste, because sometimes I do waste time on other things, but um beta reading and editing is using that precious commodity.
Yeah.
And so I need to be careful of that. But the two anthologies I've edited were two of the most amazing times of my life because, or in my working life, because I just discovering all of these voices and choosing stories and how you're going. It's like putting a little puzzle together in a way, like the whole process of doing an anthology. Um, so I do love that, but I have to put brakes on and say, oh, I got to concentrate. You have to figure out what your main priority is and then focus there. And if you have time left over, you know, uh, go for other things.
Yeah, I absolutely 100% get that. Even with writing a novel and then also like, ooh, well, I want to put a short story in that anthology, or I want them to consider a short story for this anthology. And yeah, right now I've got New Orleans just pounding on my brain trying to get out while I'm also in England. So
I hear you. Both of those locations for me are, for New Orleans, I talked about like the occult and like voodoo. I've always been interested in practices, religious practices um of like Afro-Caribbean religion.
Mhm.
And that's another reason why Isabel Wilde exists, because I wanted to tap into she doesn't practice voodoo or anything like that, but just like knocking on those doors of like,
Mhm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
New Orleans is big for that. So
Yeah, I started going down a voodoo kind of path, but then I have a cat burglar in my head, and she won't go away. So I think I
yeah,
need to just get her out and
yeah,
see what happens
sounds
with
like it. Sounds like it.
that. All right. So finally, where can our fans find you? Social medias, websites,
Holly
things.
West, hollywest.com, Holly West on Instagram. I think I'm writer Holly West on Facebook, but I'm not really on it anymore. I'd say Instagram and my website are the best places to find me. I also have a newsletter that hasn't been updated in a while, but it's Holly West, no, hollywest.substack.com. It's on Substack.
Yeah,
I
yeah, it
get the
has
link
the
on
extra dots in there.
hollywest.com. But that newsletter focuses on that idea of preserving your creativity, recognizing and protecting your creativity, and there's a mental health focus as well. I suffered from depression, and so I wanted to, and that affects my creativity and the time that I can put into it. And so it's basically about clearing the stuff away so that you can get down to your creative self, be your best creative self.
That's wonderful. That sounds awesome. Yeah, a lot of authors are on Substack, and this interview will also be on Substack.
Oh,
And
lovely. Fantastic.
so, all right. Well, I think that's all the questions I had for today. Thank you so much for being here. And thank you all for watching Blackbird Writers Presents Author Interviews.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ollie.